Hi folks! A question that gets asked over and over again and argued about over and over again is just how real is sim racing? And to be fair, it's very difficult to answer that properly because in order to do so, you'd need to have driven the same car at the same track in the same conditions with telemetry from both in order to compare them. So what are we waiting for? Oh, and you'd also want to do it in the same race kit as well, just to make sure you get a proper one-to-one comparison. Let's go! Okay, so the helmet was a little bit overkill, but nevertheless, let's get stuck into a comparison between the iRacing simulation platform and real life. For this, we're going to use the Formula Ford 1600 car at Knockhill, two aspects of motorsport that I'm quite familiar with. We raced at Knockhill in Formula Ford for a decade, 10 years in total, and although the car we raced was a Van Diemen chassis in real life versus the Ray that's in iRacing, the engine, the gearbox and the tyres are all identical between all the cars, so it is quite close. And although we didn't race, as I say, the Ray itself, we raced against the Ray quite a lot. In fact, most of the time at Knockhill during that period, the competition were in Ray chassis. So yeah, sometimes we were a bit faster, sometimes they were a bit faster, but on balance it was very similar pace. So yeah, it's pretty close in that respect. So how are we going to do this? So we're going to try and be as accurate as possible in setting up the simulation and setting up the lap to compare with the real life one. So we looked through all the onboard footage archives that we have and the data that we have to go along with it to try and find something from the same time period as the iRacing scan came from, so that the circuit in the sim and the circuit in real life are as closely matched as possible. So we found a qualifying lap from June, I think it was 2019, which I believe is a similar kind of period, late 2019, early 2020, that the scan took place, so the circuit's very similar. We're going to set the sim up with the same time of day, the same date obviously as well, and also look back the weather data and the data that we have to set the temperature at the same level as well, and the cloud cover, etc. iRacing doesn't quite go low enough to simulate proper Scotland, so we're about 2 or 3 degrees higher in the sim than we were in real life, but it's close as we're going to get type thing, so it's not too bad. We're going to put the same fuel load in the car, obviously, and then the sim in general is naturally going to be faster than real life because you don't have certain things like the fear of death when you're heading over Duffus or through the chicane and things at Knockhill if something goes wrong when you're in the simulator. So just to try and even the playing field a little bit, I'm going to set the track state in iRacing to be at its slowest level. But this is how we're going to go about it. So first off, I'm going to just run a side-by-side split-screen onboard lap, one in the sim and the real-life one alongside it. No commentary from me, and you can just see how the laps compare and kind of draw your own conclusions from that. Next, we're going to look at the telemetry for both laps, overlay them, and try and pick out some key points where maybe one was faster or slower than the other, or where they were very similar. Then I'd like to go through the laps again, but this time maybe in a bit more slow motion, break down some of the key areas, some of the key differences, some things I've noticed when I've been driving the car. Again, where they're similar, where they're not. And then, yeah, we'll try and give some conclusion. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It'll be very, very interesting to do this. So, yeah, can't wait to get stuck in. So, as I say, there's chapters in the description if you want to skip ahead or skip back or watch things again. Up to you guys. If not, just sit back, relax, and enjoy. Let's get stuck in, shall we? Right, here we go then, Knockhill Racing Circuit, Formula Ford 1600. On the left you've got the real footage, on the right you've got the sim footage. The videos are timed to match up exactly when the cars cross the line, so here we go, enjoy! Right, it's obvious the sim is faster. Much faster. Pretty much 2.2 seconds faster in this case, and I could almost certainly go quicker still if I spent more time adjusting setting up and improving my driving. 2.2 seconds around Knockhill is massive. So, what does that mean? iRacing is garbage and we should just all cancel our memberships and play Toka 2 for the best simulation of a Formula Ford? Well, not quite. Let's dive into the data. Right, welcome to the data and two graphs. On the top graph we're going to show the speed trace along a lap of Knockhill, and in the bottom graph we're going to look at the engine revs in RPM. Speed is in miles per hour, I should say. So, first off, here is the real trace from actual data recorded from that lap at Knockhill, and if we import the sim data in red on top of it, we can see some comparisons. Now, apologies on not being able to bring up a delta time here, but the telemetry tools we used in the real car were different from the Motec I used in iRacing, so I've had to manually overlay the traces, but it should still allow us to pick out some areas of interest. So first let's talk about the revs, and in particular the gearing of the car. On my first run with the short gearing pack suggested in iRacing for Knockhill, the revs were absolutely sky high everywhere. They were completely off the chart down here. I mean properly sky high, like crank through the engine block sky high. It was crazy. It seems that's just how the iRacing ff1600 engine model works. You can rev all the way to 8,000 without actually having any issues. In real life, not so much. I'm not entirely sure where that comes from because they presumably got some real data from a Kent 1600 Formula Ford to model the engine in the sim, but something's definitely not right. Also, taking the issue of all the internal components parting company with each other in spectacular fashion aside, if I had been changing at 7,500 in real life and spiking at 8,000 every lap, the engine would have boiled itself alive. We had trouble keeping it cool in the hottest days as it was, and that was up on the Scottish moor where it had been known to snow in summer. So goodness knows what it would do in a warm day in a normal country. Fundamentally, I think the engine has too much headroom and is too bulletproof in iRacing. Not to mention that the cooling system is far too efficient as well. So, in order for us to have some kind of meaningful comparison, I swapped in the standard gearing pack and forced myself to change gear where I did in real life, so around about 6,800 or so. Incidentally, iRacing doesn't give you the freedom to run whatever ratios you please in all of the gears and the final drive ratio, presumably to make the car more approachable for rookies, which is fair, given that it's one of their free entry-level cars. But with all that in mind, let's compare the traces. So when you take all that into consideration, the traces are pretty close. If you ignore the change from third to fourth, as you can see here, which happens, and also on the main straight I suppose, which happens far later, simply because the ratios in third and fourth I think are a bit longer than they are in real life. But the fourth gear ratio being longer than it is in the real case brings us to the next major difference between the plots. You'll notice that the revs are very closely matched as we approach turn 1, but the speed, on the other hand, looking at the top trace, is not. We're going faster. We're going about 4 miles per hour faster in the sim, which is huge. We don't see quite the same thing in the back straight when we're accelerating down the back straight sort of here. Speed traces are a little bit closer. So this kind of leads me to believe that the wind direction and strength is playing a bit of a part in this. Unfortunately, I didn't have a note of what it was like on the actual day as far as the wind goes, so I've just set it to calm in the sim. But given that the main straight and the back straight run in opposite directions, a tailwind down one is a headwind down the other. So if we're up 4 miles per hour on the main straight, we'd expect to be 4 miles per hour down on the back straight, which we are. So fundamentally, the car has too much power and torque, and that is where a big chunk of the speed difference is coming from. Next, let's concentrate on the speed trace on the top graph and pick out some points. So the apex at turn 3, which is McIntyre's, is far too high. That's a 5 mile an hour increase, which is just mad. The run down the hill before this through Leslie's is slightly too high as well. Taking this alongside how much later on the brakes we are into the hairpin here, and also how aggressive this initial braking phase is. If you look at the initial line, it's almost vertical compared to a much more linear braking in real life. And we see the same thing at Clark's, to be fair. There's very sharp initial braking phase, then tailing off. If we take those two things together, it tells us one story. The tyres are too sticky. One surefire way you could tell when the tyres were going off or getting to the end of their life in the real car was when you couldn't brake as late or as hard without locking up. And here in the sim, we're able to brake much harder than we ever could in real life. So again, this shouldn't be possible. So there's another chunk of time gained in the sim. One last big difference on the sim, in terms of the sim being faster, is the chicane. We're going through it faster a little bit initially, well, quite fast initially, and then we come out of it massively quicker as well. But this is not entirely the fault of the tyres or the engine of the car, but rather a built-in advantage that sim racing always has. I mentioned at the start of the video how there's no fear of death in the sim, but anyone who has driven a single-seater at speed through the chicane at Knockhill, where you're so low you can't see anything but sky, knows that it takes more than a little courage to take it properly. I mean, you are going through that at around about 85, almost 90. Well, you enter it at 90 miles per hour and you drop to 85 through this. So you're going at some speed and you can't see. I don't think in all my time there I ever took the chicane without holding my breath. It's just one of those corners. So again, here the advantage of the sim has is more to do with sim things than a kind of correlation error with the car. You're taking it faster naturally because there is no fear. Right. Positive points. I promise there are some positive points here. I'm getting there. So, first off, the apex speed through Duffus is bang on. I mean, scarily close. And to be fair, Clark and the hairpin are also pretty good when you look at the minimum speed. It just doesn't last very long in these corners for the reasons we've just spoke about. But this is an important point, because excluding the special case of the chicane, Duffus is the fastest and most technically demanding corner in terms of how the chassis and suspension behaves on the track. It's also one you can't cut unrealistically in the sim because here there is an off-track penalty, so the line you take is as close to real life as it gets. And that's why this one corner shows what iRacing have done absolutely perfectly. The chassis dynamics are spot on. Here the car is moving so fast that the balance of the chassis and how it reacts to all the undulations and weight transfer is the governing factor of how fast you can go. And, well, the speed trace speaks for itself. I really am super impressed with how close the traces are here. The other great correlation are the braking points. Everything, with the exception with the hairpin probably, as we spoke about earlier, is pretty much spot on. And this leads into probably the best thing about iRacing, and something you can't get from looking at lines in a graph, the actual feeling of driving the car. I've done so many laps around Knockhill in a Formula Ford in real life, and as soon as I step into the sim and head out of the pits, everything comes flooding back. From the feeling through the steering, to the visual references, to the imagined G-forces my brain creates when driving the sim, it all might be happening a little bit quicker, as we've seen, but when I'm actually doing laps, it is a nostalgia overload. So, let's take a look at the laps again in a little bit more detail, slow things down a bit, and I'll try to explain what I mean. Right, so here are the two laps side by side again, and what we're going to do here is to play it back at 50% speed, so it's a little bit slower, a little bit easier to notice some details and point things out. We're going to go through it section by section to try and keep the cars in sync as much as possible, because as we know the sim car is going to keep getting faster over the lap. So first we're going to look at Duffus, Leslie, McIntyre Complex, turns 1, 2 and 3 at Knockhill. And things to look out for when they play the video forward here are going to be, first off, it's difficult to see in the onboard shot because of the helmet, but my right hand, because you can see when I change gear, if you watch that it's quite interesting. Also the kind of obviously the line that's been taken each time, and the kind of any corrections you can see in the steering wheel, the amount of steering lock and the type of correction that's being made. You will notice that there's a lot more understeer or rear stability, I should probably say, in the simulated version. The real car, the rear end does float around quite a lot, and again you could probably simulate that in the sim with setup changes. But I'm not sure how. I don't know. I've not done enough setup work in the sim to see if that would be faster or not. Anyway, let's play and see how it looks. Right, so here we go. Watch the right hand for the change down at the third, and try and keep an eye on the left hand picture because it just pops onto the steering wheel at the same time. Over the curb, the real car's a little bit more loose, but once the car settles, we've got a bit of a correction in both. The steering angles are very similar. On the brakes again, watch the hand for the gear change. Again, exactly the same point. We're hitting the same apex, but we've got more understeer at the apex in the sim car. But once the car kind of settles again out the corner, we're taking the same line. Yeah, so that was, even at 50%, still quite a quick little section of corners. But I'll play it back at full speed now, with the sound on as well, so you can appreciate how it looks and hopefully spot these things at full speed. I don't know if you noticed, but what's actually also quite cool when you listen to it full speed is that you can hear just about in the audio that the throttle application point is exactly the same in both, especially out of McIntyre's. It's quite cool. Yeah, so overall, through turns 1, 2 and 3, the feeling of the sim is absolutely incredible. Again, as I say, a little bit more understeer in the sim than there is in real life, but again, we could probably tune that with some setup adjustments. But the actual feeling of driving the car through those corners, even though we're a bit too fast in the sim, as we've talked about already, that it's the feeling. The feeling is incredible. So amazing. Right, let's jump ahead to the chicane. So we've reset the car so that we're going to be at the same point right on the apex of the chicane, and there's no gear changes here to look at, so it's really just the line we're focused on and the kind of steering inputs and the angle of the steering wheel. It's actually going to be easier for me just to point out the differences because things are very similar here. The big difference is in the real car case, when we land off the first curve, there's a nice natural rotation in the car that kind of points you towards the exit, so you won't see me put too much steering lock in, whereas in the sim, when the car lands, again, the rear end seems to be really planted, kind of the same as we saw through turns 1, 2 and 3, so you have to actually put quite a decent amount of steering lock in to get the car rotated, but after that initial moment, things line up quite closely again in the exit. So I'll play it slow motion here and we can have a look. So hit the right curb at the bottom of the dip, and then we're just kissing the bollards on the left. Here's the point where it lands. I talked about a little bit more lock on the right, but after that, very similar. We're using all the track, and yeah, again, pretty cool. Not much to say there, apart from that a little bit of extra lock that you have to apply at the right hand side. And as I said, in the data we are going faster, but in the sim you don't really notice it. It is so equal. The feeling of going through the chicane is crazy. So let's play it back full speed, have a look, and then we'll jump ahead to Clark. Right, a little reset of the cars again to bring them in line, and we're on the way to Clark Corner. So here we changed down a gear from 4th down to 3rd. It happens a little bit later in the sim here, but again, very close, and again that's probably due to the different speeds that we're carrying on this straight between the sim and real life. Here it's really interesting, and it's really cool how close the kind of handling and the approach is here. So what to look out for here is after we change down, we start the turn in. So we actually get a little bit of opposite lock as we're braking, which you might spot both hands just correcting a little bit of a slide in the brakes. Then we start the turn in, then we have a little correction, then we turn in more. Then we straighten the steering wheel towards as we hit the curb at the apex, and then we get the same issue that we did at the chicane, where the sim car has some understeer, and the real car has a nice little rotation in it. So we have to apply more lock in the sim to get the car around the corner. But then once that initial lock's been applied, the exit again is very similar, and we use all the track on the way out. So let's play it in slow motion and see if we can spot these things. So here we go, watch for the down change, there we go. Small correction, turn in, the correction, straighten the steering wheel now, across the curb, then you've got a bit more lock, move that correction in the sim, and then out to the edge of the curb and down the straight. So yeah, again, it happens very quickly, but it's yeah, you can watch it back if you want, but take my word for it, it is incredible. The other thing I should say about Clark is that in the real car there's a very distinct thump that you feel through the steering wheel as the car comes off the curb, and the way it lands, you get this kind of really distinct feeling. Doesn't really come across in the videos, but in the simulator it's exactly the same. You get that same thump through the steering wheel as you come off the curb. So again, talking about the way the car's handling, the chassis dynamics, the way the suspension's obviously dealing with bumps and things, and the way that's translated through the forces, trust me when I tell you it is amazing how similar the feeling is through Clark. So now we'll just watch it back at full speed, it won't take long, and we'll fast forward a little bit to the hairpin for the last corner. And finally we come to the hairpin, the last corner on the circuit. Now here we're braking obviously from top speed all the way down. You can't really see the shifts on the real footage because the helmet's in the way. So really just watching the steering angle on the racing line. So we've got obviously quite a big turn in to get the car into the apex, and then it kind of reduces slightly as we get to the apex. And then when we get on the power, it's really interesting because the back end comes round slightly, and both videos show exactly the same correction. If you watch the hands and the exit, there's a little slight correction, and both hands move exactly the same amount and at the same time. Then we come out the corner smoothly, and as I change up gear, again, you can't see my hand in the real footage, but if you watch the rev lights on the steering wheel, obviously go up to the red light is the marker to change gear, and the moment I change in the real footage, which you can see by the fact the lights go off, you can see my right foot coming off the throttle and lifting briefly to change gear in the sim, and it's amazing how close they are. Again, incredible. So let's play it and see if we can spot these things back. So down the straight on the way to the corner, you can see with the rev lights that we're still accelerating, and we hit the brakes now. Now watch for the big sweeping steering angle into the apex line. Again, very similar, but it takes slightly more curve in the sim. Then watch here and then here. Look at that correction. It's just incredible how close that is. Now watch the rev lights on the left hand side change, and then we'll build up and again watch the rev lights again and change there. Amazing, incredible how close that is. It's really cool. So let's let's watch that back full speed, and then let's take some conclusions, shall we? So what have we learned from all that? Are we able to answer that long debated question, how real is sim racing? Well, to be honest, yes and no. We've been able to do some pretty detailed comparisons between the real and virtual cases, but of course we're only looking at one car, at one track, in one weather condition. But whilst that's not a totally comprehensive review, it has given us some clear conclusions about the specific case. So how real is sim racing? Again, the answer is very and not very at the same time. And which of those it is depends on what you want your sim racing experience to be. In terms of lap time and absolute one-to-one accuracy, there are some issues. In the Formula 4, the engine is too powerful, the cooling system is too efficient, and the tyres are too sticky. All of that leads to more than 2 seconds advantage around Knockhill, which isn't exactly a small margin of error. And I've done a little bit more running in the sim after I finished recording this video, and it's probably going to end up more like 3 seconds advantage to the sim once I finish tuning the setup and my driving to Knockhill. So yeah, it's not exactly the closest in terms of absolute lap time. But as we've seen, in terms of actual feeling of driving a Formula 4 around Knockhill, the sim is incredibly realistic. The steering, pedal, gear shift inputs are, when you're in the heat of the moment in the car, virtually identical everywhere. I know we spoke about small differences when we did the slow motion analysis, but again, when things are going full speed and you're actually driving it, I honestly can't spot the difference. Like, there's no point around the lap where the immersion is completely broken and I suddenly realise I'm staring at a monitor in a room in a simulator. Of course, a lot of that immersion also comes from the way we have the wheelbase and the pedals set up and the forces there, as well as the incredible Quaife engineering H-pattern shifter from ProSim that I use. And at some point I'll do a tuning for max immersion video to show how we've set that all up for the Formula 4, because it really does make that feeling of driving the real car come flooding back, and the muscle memory kicks in right as soon as I start driving. One last point, and I didn't cover this in the main video, but of course we have to talk about the actual racing aspect, and that is another area where iRacing have absolutely nailed the Formula 4 experience. When you're in a race with other drivers, the actual feeling and the emotions and the type of battling and slipstreaming and things you have to do against everyone else is 100% just like the real thing. So again, top marks for iRacing. So, how real is sim racing? Well, if you want your sim experience to really feel as close to the real thing as it can be, and for me, that has been my #1 goal ever since I started on this sim racing journey. Not necessarily to be the absolute fastest person out there, but I do try my best, but more to give me the closest feeling to driving these cars in real life that I can possibly get at home. If that is what you want from your sim racing experience, I can confidently say that in terms of the iRacing Ray ff1600 at Knockhill Racing Circuit, sim racing is extremely real. But what do you think? Do you agree, disagree? Let me know in the comments. And if you've liked this, there's a button specifically designed for you to let me know that, shaped like a thumbs up sign. And of course, if you like listening to me drone on about all things sim racing and real racing, etc., then you can always subscribe to the channel. Anyway, see you in the next one, folks. Thanks for watching.